Right, let's get straight down to business. Now, you may have seen Nikki's review of the Genesis GV60 elsewhere on the channel, and if not, why not? But here's something a little bit less controversial. It's called the Genesis Electrified GV70, which kind of sounds like it should have been made for us. And yes, it is a pure electric 5-seat mid-sized SUV, and it goes up against, you guessed it, all of the other mid-sized pure electric 5-seat SUVs, of which there are now quite a few. But all we're going to do today is try and work out whether the electrified GV70 should be on your shopping list. Oh, and by the way, please do get into the comments and tell us whether you think this is a really good idea and a lot more choice, or whether it's a pointless addition. And do like and subscribe, because that way you know what's coming up. Really? I think I'll be the judge of that.
First up, some housekeeping in case you missed the genesis of Genesis. It's basically the luxury arm of Hyundai/Kia that's been making cars since 2015, but only entered the UK market in 2021. Unsurprisingly, that means the hardware is all based around the same stuff as our favourite Hyundais and Kias, wrapped up in different bodies. And that means that the electric versions get some of the best bits in the business.
Which means we shouldn't ignore the electrified GV70. Now, I've got to point out that this is not a bespoke electric car, which means there are petrol and diesel versions knocking around, which always makes my teeth itch because it speaks of compromise. Also, this car starts at £65,405. You're going to have to impress me for that much money. Immediately, I actually think it looks quite good, if a little bit kind of generic. At the front you've got this big shield-shaped grille, which actually Genesis calls the crest grille, and that's common to all of their cars, which is completely fake. The cooling bit is actually down here where there's actual gap, but this matrix pattern in the front does a good job of disguising this, which is actually the charge port, which is quite good. And then as we move down the car, you get this twin set of double stacked headlights, which again is common to all Genesis cars. And then this body line, which runs from the front here all the way down the side to the point where it starts to dip through the back door over the back wheel arch, which is fine, apart from the fact you've also got this chrome line that goes across the window line and dips towards the back. And that's a kind of a riffing on a Genesis design feature. The problem I've got with it is that there's also this line in the shoulder, which makes the car look slightly busy. It's not actively ugly, but it is a little bit odd. I do, however, like these optional 20-inch wheels, but there's more at the back. And then when you get to the back, it's kind of the same vibe. So you get double stacked tail lights, and while it's clean and it's modern, I do, again, get the feeling that this is somehow quite generic. Like it could be one of those unidentifiable cars in an insurance ad or a computer game. Size-wise, it's about the same size as a Porsche Macan, so not massive, and actually it's a little bit lower than you think when you stand next to it. It looks a bit taller in pictures, so it's definitely more of an urban off-roader rather than a big SUV. Inside, I'm actually quite impressed. It just feels really quite nice and designery. It's got a big 12.3-inch driver information display in a kind of traditional configuration up in front of you, and then this bigger rectangular touchscreen set back and into the dash. Then there's climate control with physical buttons down here, another little touchscreen, and then all of the rotary controls. So that's the gear selector, and this is the sort of drive controller for the touchscreen down here, which all feels very nice. There are, however, a couple of things that I don't like. One is it's really obvious that this car isn't a bespoke electric car, because you see this volume down here. That's the transmission tunnel in a car with an engine. Now obviously this is electric, so it hasn't got an exhaust and a transmission, and yet all of that space is wasted. You do get some storage. There's a little slot here with a wireless phone charger and a couple of USB ports, cup holders, and then this bin. But compared to some electric cars that have been made specifically to be electric, this feels actually quite cramped with very little storage. Saying that, I do like the quality. Everything you touch feels really, really nice, except for the fact that parts of this are cool metal, which feels really good. And then some of these buttons are just silver plastic. So it's that difference that sort of takes away from the whole feel of it being really expensive, which it could have done quite easily by just having slightly nicer buttons under here. There are some really wicked details though. You see these panels in the door? They're not very bright, but they're actually illuminated, and they're different shadows, so they kind of look like an oil painting of a mountain range. It's not in your face, it's not disco lights, it's just nice ambient lighting, which is really cool. And you see that little nipple there? Well, that is fingerprint recognition. So what you do is you get the car to store your thumbprint, and then you have all of your settings saved in the car. So whenever you get into it, all you do is put your thumb on that thing, and then the whole car, from radio station to what temperature you like to where your seat is, gets set for you. That is really quite useful. There's also augmented reality sat-nav, which is actually quite useful. And then this little rotary controller for the touchscreen actually has fingerprint recognition built into the top, so you can write your destination. It actually does work, which is a surprise, but it's actually really good. And there are a host of other cool little gadgets. It's a really nicely sorted, quite techno-feeling car, but then it looks quite designery as well. I quite like it.
As far as the rest goes, it's big enough in the back, but the centre seat is raised and therefore only really good for shorter journeys or shorter people. And the boot is big. At 503 litres, it's a really useful space.
Although it does have a frunk, that's supposed to be 25 litres, but it's a bit of a con because they've also got the tyre kit in there, and it's only useful if you want to put paperback books in it. Now here's an interesting one, because this electric GV70 is, well, it's not exactly lacking in performance, which is something I seem to be saying a lot about electric cars these days. But this car has 2 motors, all-wheel drive, and just over 480 brake horsepower. It's also got 516 pounds-feet of torque. And that means it will sprint from 0 to 62 miles an hour in just over 4 seconds, which is quite fast for a 5-seat SUV. There's also drive mode, so you get Eco, Comfort and Sport, which do all the things that they usually do. So Eco knocks off the throttle response, basically makes the steering a bit lighter and gives you a little bit more range. Normal is normal, and Sport sharpens everything up, makes everything a bit more heavy. The difference between the modes is actually quite stark. So the difference between Eco, which is very gentle and very calm, and Sport, which is a lot sharper and accelerates a lot harder, is very pronounced. So it's an interesting one that they've put some real depth to those changes. But there's also terrain modes, which range from snow to mud to sand. Now, I'm not sure how many people are really going to off-road this car because it hasn't got the ground clearance, but it's quite nice to know that if you were going to try and take it across a grassy field or something, the car would take care of you, especially with an EV drivetrain. They can actually really help you off-road. To be honest though, I do feel like a car like this, which might be used by people with families or perhaps slightly older people, having that much speed is a little bit of overkill. So 0 to 62 in 4.2, brilliant, great headline, but I'd probably prefer just a touch more range, have slightly less stress in the motors, and forget all that speed. But one thing Genesis seems to do really well is pay attention to the quality of the kind of ambient driving experience. So I'm just toddling along on this country road. It keeps bleeping if I go anywhere near the white line in the centre, which is actually quite irritating. But with some of the tech packs and the audio upgrade, you get a white noise generator, so it's noise cancelling, exactly like your noise cancelling headphones. So you're driving along and it'll just produce a kind of cancelling ambient noise, which means that the GV70 actually feels very, very quiet, even for an electric car. The ride's pretty good. The way it steers is a little bit numb but quite accurate. It feels quite odd because it's got a very long bonnet and just feels like a tall saloon. So it's got great body control, especially in sport mode, and it really does go where you point it. Strangely, I feel like this car feels quite front biased, so it feels like a lot of the power is going through the front axle, which means that when you're halfway around the corner and you really push the throttle down, it sort of tugs at the wheel, and the car doesn't feel naturally sporty. It's very fast, but it doesn't feel naturally very exciting to drive. Also, as with other Genesiseses, you do get a boost mode, which gives you an extra something like 50 horsepower for 10 seconds whenever you need it. But weirdly, it's placed at the bottom in the middle of the steering wheel. Now, I found that really irritating. I'd like it to be on a gimmicky thumb wheel, somewhere where I can hit it without taking my hands off the wheel. And also, I don't get it because you can have boost mode repeatedly. So you can get that extra 50 horsepower, and then as soon as it's exhausted, it's 10 seconds, you can hit it again. So I don't understand why that's not just under the bottom of the throttle pedal. So when you give it full throttle, you get all of the power. It seems a little bit gimmicky. I don't like where the button is positioned. Another thing I really like is the fact that it has some really clever brake regen stuff. So you get the usual, you pull the left-hand paddle to increase the brake regeneration, and if you pull it enough, you get a thing called iPedal, which is clever sort of autonomous brake regen, which will work out things like traffic conditions, weather conditions, even work out what corners are coming up if you've plumbed your destination into the sat-nav, and work the brake regeneration accordingly. It's really very clever. It actually works. Another thing I really like is if you grab the paddle and hold it, it'll increase the brake regen until you let it go. So you can actually use it as a kind of hand brake. So I'm coming to this corner now, I grab that paddle, brake regen, let go, the brake regen comes off. That's actually really quite clever. That's less gimmicky than the boost button. I think it's a more valuable option. There feels in here like there are a lot of options and a lot of gadgets, and the good news is that a lot of them work.
It's also got road preview suspension, where a set of cameras look at the bumps in the road ahead and then adjust the damping to suit. One of the big advantages of being based on some of our favourite Korean cars is of course the fact they get some serious charging ability, and the GV70 is no different. With 11 kilowatt AC and 233 kilowatt DC charging from the 800 volt system, you can plug the GV70 into a big enough public rapid charger and throw in 10 to 80% in just 18 minutes, adding about 150 miles of range, which is super useful, albeit probably quite expensive at the moment. Mind you, Genesis does have an answer for that. They're throwing in a 5-year Ionity subscription, and that travels with the car, so you'll be saving quite a lot of money. There's 283 miles of WLTP range available from a 74 kilowatt hour battery, and flat to full on the average home wall box will take just under 12 hours. There are also some extras on offer. All GV70s get a heat pump for best efficiency in cold weather, and they all get battery preconditioning as standard, which not only preheats the cells for better efficiency when it's cold out, but can also optimise the battery temperature for when you get to a rapid charge location that's been programmed into the car's sat-nav.
Oh, and there's a vehicle to load charging should you feel the need to charge up your mate's car. In fact, the GV70 Electrified can actually provide up to 3.7 kilowatts of power to another vehicle, or you can just use it to charge your laptop, though there is a more convenient plug in the boot. Thing is, now I've charged up my laptop, I can look at what should make the Genesis a really good purchasing experience. If you look at it, all of the money stuff is completely transparent, from the finance to fixed pricing, so there's no awkward haggling with a sales drone. Then you get things like a personal assistant that guides you through every aspect of owning a Genesis, so the purchase, if you need your car taking in for servicing, any kind of problem that you have with it. And then there's a 5-year care plan on all of their cars that includes stuff like, I'm reading this now, includes stuff like warranty, scheduled servicing, roadside assistance, any kind of digital updates, and a courtesy car while yours is in for service. And that means that they'll bring another car to you and take yours away. Super convenient. It should be a pretty pain-free ownership prospect, and that's a good thing, because if you're not buying a car anymore for the engine or the transmission, the ownership prospect, the experience of having that car is going to be really important. So what do we think? Well, I happen to think that the Genesis Electrified GV70 is for people who don't really want to embrace completely the idea of an electric car. So they get something that's just slightly more conservative. It's actually really nice looking, it's fast, it's got a lovely interior and plenty of tech. But there are things about it that make me wince. This is for people for whom a Kia EV6 or a Hyundai Ioniq 5 or in fact a GV60 itself would be a little bit too out there. So this might fit the bill, but it's not the whole package. In fact, I personally would always go for an electric car that was designed from the outset to be electric, because you get all the advantages in terms of space, pace and grace. I think this is a good thing, but it's not good enough at this price point.
So what do you think? Is the Electrified GV70 something you'd consider, or are you more committed to going electric? If you need any advice, then please do visit electrifying.com, where we have all the relevant details for you to get happily lost in.